Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. So happy you can join me and my NBC cohort, Paul Burmeister, after an action-packed week one that ended with one of the best Monday Night Football games in memory, or at least one of the most dramatic Monday Night Football games in memory. We will break that down. Paul Burmeister will break it down with me in a matter of moments. Our guest later on in the podcast will be Rob Demovsky of ESPN.com. You know Rob Demovsky. You may know him as Bob Demovsky. He's the guy who Aaron Rodgers loves to play around with in press conferences and post-game settings, but he is one of the premier beat guys in the country. We will have him to try to dissect the 35-point debacle loss of the Green Bay Packers against the New Orleans Saints in Jacksonville in week one. Packers playing a really interesting Monday night game against the Detroit Lions in week two. But Paul, welcome. And wow, there was so much going on in week one. What really stuck out to you before we get into Raiders-Ravens a little bit? What really stuck out to you in week one?
Having the fans back really stood out, and I was a little tipped off to how much that would bring, calling the Notre Dame games on the radio and being in the stadium where we're all comparing to what we felt last year, and having the energy of the fans there was just outstanding. I think we all felt it watching from home as well. And then just the way it started, Peter, on Thursday night, and the way it ended, those common themes of drama and excitement and a lot of points and really good quarterback play starting in Tampa Thursday night and ending last night or Monday night in Vegas. That's what stood out to me, what the crowd brought, and exciting drama, great quarterback play from Thursday through Monday night.
I think so too. And what I found really interesting, honestly, overall, is the great quarterback play from the young quarterbacks. You know, if you looked at, with the exception, I think, of Trevor Lawrence, ironically, the first pick in the draft, the other young quarterbacks, Trey Lance in a cameo, Zach Wilson, particularly in the second half for the Jets. Mac Jones, I thought, even though they only put up 16 points against Miami, I thought Mac Jones played overall the best game of any of the young quarterbacks, and obviously a cameo from Justin Fields. But that there are so many right now. I mean, I wrote in my column, there's basically 11 quarterbacks 25 and younger right now starting in the NFL. A third of the quarterbacks in the NFL right now who are playing are young, and they are the next level. It's funny, when you do the average age of quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger kind of push it up a little bit. But, you know, the median age, you know, is I think 26 years and 9 months or something like that. So this is really an interesting time in NFL history with the young quarterbacks. You know, Paul, we got a lot to get to, and I really want to start with the Monday night game. Just give me your very quick observation or two about the Monday night game, and I'll follow that with mine.
Very good, Peter. I think I'll hit one from each team, and let's begin with the winning team, the Raiders. And I guess I'll have a couple here with the Raiders. Number one, it was great to see Derek Carr have that kind of performance, that kind of numbers. We often look back at his box score after a game and say, boy, you know, Raiders quarterback played pretty well, but they don't get it done in the end. And the giant numbers that he had, you can attach to really good decisions, athletic type of throws, when the game mattered the most, that led to a Raiders win. So that's number one for the Raiders. Two for the Raiders. The defense, I know, wasn't great, but this has been the worst defense in the most important category, scoring defense, the last 3 years. They made a play down the stretch that led to that overtime win. So encouragement for the defense for the Raiders, and not empty big numbers for Derek Carr stands out there. And for the Ravens, even though there's a lot of disappointment with that loss, I think that they ran the ball just fine. And that was the giant worry coming in with those injuries to the top two backs. What would the running game look like? They almost piled up 200 yards. And by their standards, that's not what they're looking for, but it was pretty darn good considering the situation. So I take away that the ground game is not a disaster in Baltimore, that it's actually okay, and that's something to build on.
Yeah, I'll go counter to a couple of your points. Number one, I'd say for maybe the first 50 minutes of the game, maybe even a little bit longer than that, I had a real problem with the Raider passing game. I thought they were very, very myopic. They targeted Darren Waller 19 times, and although the numbers look fine, 10 receptions, 105 yards, I mean, you throw to somebody 19 times, he better get 100 yards. And it bothered me that some of the guys who they really wanted to feature, I mean, Henry Ruggs, 2 catches, 46 yards. I mean, Henry Ruggs, and again, look, you don't want to overreact off week one, and so I won't. But Henry Ruggs simply got to be a bigger part of this offense if he's going to justify being the first wide receiver pick in a receiver-rich draft in 2020. On the other side, I just think that watching this game intently, I was disappointed in Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson basically fumbled 3 times, lost 2 of them. He was inaccurate at important times. And again, look, I'm not blaming him for sacks because their line was pretty rough. But what I would say is that I think your franchise quarterback has to play better. He can't turn it over like that. And to me, when I look at a guy who is really trying to lift his team on the road, especially with a game against the Kansas City Chiefs coming up in week 2, Lamar Jackson just has to be better.
Listen, he has certainly passed with flying colors the first test of his career. He's had an MVP season. He's been the leader of a team that's been one of the top 2 or 3 in the NFL. But now moving forward, it's like, okay, nice job. You're a really good quarterback. This is a really good team. The evaluation of him is based off of, can I picture you being the best quarterback in the month of January? Can I picture this team winning, led by the passing attack when it has to, when the game commands that, in February? Those are super high standards, but that's what they've set up for themselves in Baltimore. And by those standards, I agree. Lamar Jackson was disappointing last night. He was fine most of the time. He made big plays running. He certainly made a decent amount of big plays passing. But when you evaluate him based off the bottom line, what you're looking for from him in that offense for a team that, can they be the best team in the NFL? That was a failure last night by what they're expected to do in that city.
You know, looking ahead to them playing Kansas City, I think 2 things really stick out to me. Number one, you play a long, physical, overtime game on Monday night. Now you have to go back. They probably landed in Maryland at 6:30 on Tuesday morning. Some day off. The guys are just going to go home and basically collapse and take the day off. But then they've got to come back and play maybe the best team in football on a short week. So that is going to be tough. That'll be one thing, the fatigue factor in what you're looking for. Number 2, I think the other thing is, Paul, you were a quarterback, obviously, at Iowa. You understand the importance of a defense being able to get pressure with your regular people up front. And in this particular game, the Baltimore Ravens really had to bring extra players to get pressure. And in this game, it's almost pick your poison when you play Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, you can blitz, and you could even get home once in a while. No question about it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers did that in the Super Bowl. It will worry me if they consistently have to bring, say, Patrick Queen or maybe a safety coming down to try to generate the kind of pressure to take Patrick Mahomes off his game. So, to me, they really need to concentrate with their front on beating an inexperienced Kansas City line that struggled some in the first game. Orlando Brown gave up 5 significant pressures in his first game at left tackle. The Ravens have to see if they can take advantage of that with a regular rush.
I think it's a really timely point with that game they have coming up too, Peter, the fact that they need to bring extra people to get pressure because the Chiefs, and let's forget about Patrick Mahomes for a second, just their passing weapons. They have two that command double team consideration. If you're not going to do it on every single play, you at least have to think about it. They have two really where a lot of people have none. Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill both command the kind of thought from a defense like, maybe we should have a safety over the top of this person. Maybe we should put our best person on this player the entire time and then put a couple on the other guy. I mean, no matter who you label their number one or who you label their other guy, that's your number one worry. So I think it comes into focus against their next opponent as much as it does against anybody else they'll play the rest of the season.
No question about that. I thought one of the other things that happened last night that was interesting, look, the first half of the game, mostly, I watched ESPN. I watched Steve Levy and Louis Riddick and Brian Griese. But the second half, I turned on ESPN2 and watched the Manning brothers with a succession of guests. And I don't know, Paul, I thought that was a home run. And because I didn't see much of the first half and then saw a couple of things on social media, you know, Peyton Manning does not have to be Frank Caliendo Jr. To be really good on TV. And I think in the first half, he was trying some shticky things. Not saying they're not funny, but I think people are turning in not to see a comedian, but they're in there to see some light, interesting football analysis. And that's what they got in the second half. Funny stories along with it, but some really good football analysis. Honestly, I don't know how ESPN, which had scheduled Peyton and Eli Manning for 10 of these, come and sit with us and watch the game and you'll have fun doing it. They had scheduled 10 of these for their Monday night package. I don't know how they're not going to do that. I mean, I don't want to use triple negatives, but they need to do that every week. I think it was very, very entertaining and will draw, in my opinion, more viewers into that game than would normally watch that game.
I agree, Peter. I had high expectations and I was pleasantly surprised. I had my in-laws in town last night and they were in another room and I went in to watch the Peyton and Eli broadcast and my wife came in and she's like, are you going to do this the entire night? And I didn't know if she meant watch the other broadcast or ignore the family that's in the other room. So I ended up not doing quite as much of either as I truly wanted. But what really stood out to me, and I agree, Peter, that there were moments where maybe there was some forced humor, but there's always going to be some levity and some inside jokes and leaning on humor when Peyton's around. Even when he was doing that maybe a little bit too much, he was adding some pretty good insight, like talking about 3rd down and 10. I think it was in the first half. He's like, this is when, don't throw it to 10 or 11 yards, throw it to 20, throw it to 40, do something the defense isn't expecting. Right. And I'm like, that's a really good point. And it was just like having a podcast with two people who get along really well and have, outstanding quarterback insight going on during the game. And I thought Eli was really, really good with that same Eli look on his face that we used to see on the sideline all the time. He had excellent insight as well. And I always watch, part of my entertainment is enjoying what the play-by-play person is doing and paying close attention. I had to push that aside and say, okay, I'm not going to get what I normally get out of that. But the podcast aspect with the quarterback insight was even better than I thought it was going to be. And I'm with you. I wish it was going to be around every single Monday night game.
Who knows? It may be. We'll see. But I think the calls will come in from ESPN executives who are going to watch. You know, they measure social media. And last night when I was on social media, it was as much about Peyton and Eli as it was about every aspect of a bizarre, weird, incredible football game, but a very, very compelling game. So I would expect that whether Eli and Peyton will do it, that ESPN will try to lean on them to do it. Paul, let's go to one other topic before we just do a bunch of very quick hits around the NFL. You know, I was really curious. I thought the game that blew me away in week 1 was New Orleans 38, Green Bay 3. Obviously, you look at it from the Green Bay standpoint and you see, I don't know what the right word is to say, but for some reason, flippant comes to mind when I watch the reaction of the Packers to getting their rear ends kicked, worse than an Aaron Rodgers team has ever gotten beat. And I was blown away by that and also surprised by they had almost a shoulder shrugging reaction to it, at least from what we could see on camera. That bugged me a little bit. At some point, as leaders of that team, don't you have to take your teammates by the throat and just say, we're not going down like this? And again, I don't mean to say that Aaron Rodgers has to be Tom Brady or whoever, but that really surprised me. And then the other part that surprised me, obviously, was the incredible presence and sort of patience and decision-making of a guy who we have known as the most intercepted passer in the NFL since 2015, since he was a rookie. But Jameis Winston, I thought, was really incredible in this game.
I wasn't wholly surprised at how well Jameis Winston played. I mean, I like you, Peter, and everybody else didn't expect him to be in such an advantageous situation the entire time, with the team up by so many points and the other team playing so poorly. But if you look at it this way, I mean, Jameis Winston, yes, he was an interception and turnover machine that last season when he hit 30. But going back and looking at his production or lack thereof in Tampa Bay the previous 4 seasons, his interception level was in the teens and oftentimes in the low teens. So he was prone to risk taking. He wasn't the turnover machine that he was that last season. And then if you take it a step further and look at what Drew Brees did when he was really pushing the ball downfield that first decade in New Orleans with Sean Payton, he hit the mid-teens in interceptions all the time. Now, he was also close to 70% and throwing a crazy amount of touchdowns. But it's not like Sean Payton can't win in New Orleans, looking at his history, with a quarterback who's going to throw somewhere between 10 and 15 interceptions a season. Drew Brees did it, and they won at a giant level. So I wasn't that surprised that Jameis played well after taking a year off and learning under Drew Brees. And I think this team can win with him if he does throw more interceptions than other quarterbacks, as long as he keeps it, south of that 20 number.
Yeah, the other thing I think that Jameis Winston has done, and talking to both him and Sean Payton after the game, I think he knows now, at least there are signs that he knows now. And again, you don't want to overreact to one game, and I won't, because I can't tell you whether Jameis Winston is over the turnover bug. We'll see. But the reason that I thought it was such a good sign in the first game is when I asked him what his favorite play of the game was. What's the play in this game that you threw when you threw 5 touchdowns? What's the one throw you made that you'll remember out of this game? And he said it was a throwaway late in the first quarter. And nobody will remember the play. I had to go back and look at it. Matt Casey, our poobah at NBC, ended up basically clipping it off and sending me so I could look at it, because I did not have the game recorded when I was writing Sunday night. I don't have the Game Pass available yet, so I needed Matt to clip off this play. But it's a play late in the first quarter where Jameis Winston goes back. He looks to the left. He obviously wants to throw a wheel route to Alvin Kamara coming out of the backfield. Kamara is covered right away by a linebacker. He might be able to get the ball in, but the linebacker's kind of laying in wait there. And if Winston makes the throw, he's got a clear path down the sideline to return it for a touchdown. Then Jameis looks downfield, okay, but then he comes back and he throws the ball 6 feet over Kamara's head. And so it was just a regular throwaway. You see it all the time in the NFL. And the reason why Jameis Winston liked that is that the other day they ran this play in practice. Winston threw an interception to one of his own linebackers, and he was determined, as he said to me later, that if that happens in the game and this guy is covered, I'm going to throw the ball so high that Shaq couldn't pick it off. And so that's exactly what he did in the game. So count that as a lesson learned by Jameis Winston. Will he remember that lesson for 16 games, for 15 more games? We'll see. But I thought it was a really encouraging sign in week 1.
I love that word that you used there twice there at the end there, Peter, in lesson. And I think what Jameis told you, if I remember correctly from reading your article Monday, is that one of the lessons he learned from Drew Brees is that it's decisions over results, and it's the decision making that matters the most. And it really made me think, and I like to compare things to what we know best. So we're in the media business here, Peter. What if you got to go cover the Bengals as a beat reporter, as you did when you were a kid in this business for 5 or 6 years, and then go back to the #1 media school in the country and get a PhD? Think about how much more you would have learned in your mid to late 20s, and how you would have absorbed all those great lessons after you had all that real experience in the professional world of doing it well sometimes, not doing it so well the other times. And that's basically what Jameis Winston got last year in New Orleans. 70-some starts in the NFL, a lot of good, a lot of bad. Let's go sit in the sideline and let's learn from Sean Payton and Drew Brees. And I think he was able to take in all of those things that one could potentially learn because he had so much experience in the league. So I'm excited for this opportunity, just as a former quarterback standpoint, but it would make sense to me if he's a lot better this year because he was able to take that experience and learn from one of the best.
Agree totally. We need to do some quick hits around the league now, Paul, and
I gotcha.
Let's sort of bop back and forth on a few things that really stood out to both of us after week 1. One of them is going to be a bit of a look ahead, too. I want to hear your thoughts on the New York Giants. To me, the Giants, 7 of the last 8 years, they've started 0-2. And they go to Washington. And you say, well, the good news is that they play Taylor Heineke. I'm not sure that that's good news. Taylor Heineke went head-to-head with Tom Brady and played a very competitive wild card playoff game when nobody had ever heard of him last January. So, but anyway, it's a short week. They don't have a fully healthy, in-the-groove Saquon Barkley. Their receivers are still not fully healthy, Kadarius Toney particularly. Their offensive line played pretty well on Sunday, I thought, against the Denver Broncos. Not great, but pretty well. But this is a team that desperately needs to get off the schneid. It's the losingest team, along with the New York Jets, in the last 4 years in the NFL. Wow. And yet, I don't see a lot of great and positive signs going into Washington on Thursday.
I didn't know they'd been that bad the last 4 years, Peter. I knew last year offensively, they were 31st in the league in the stat that matters the most, and that's scoring points. Here's what stood out to me, Peter. Everything was supposed to be better offensively for really logical reasons. I mean, they have continuity back on the staff with Jason Garrett back. Say what you will about Jason. It matters when a quarterback and his play caller are together for seasons on end. They upgraded at the skill position. Saquon was supposed to be healthier. I know not his best yet, but he didn't really add anything. And Daniel Jones had another key turnover. So for all the expectations of things that should have been a giant step forward, was equal to or maybe even lesser than last year. So I think the disappointment level for all the things that should have moved forward really stands out to me for how the Giants lost that game.
One of the other teams in week 1 that really impressed me for a lot of different reasons is the Houston Texans. Now you can say, hey, it's just beating Jacksonville, who cares? The Texans dominated an NFL game with what I consider to be nearly an expansion team roster. And so my whole thing about watching a bunch of that Houston game is you say whatever you want about how bad Jacksonville is, and they look pretty bad. But, I mean, I think that what I had not really expected is that Tyrod Taylor played very well, very efficiently, and David Culley had this team ready to play. David Culley was my coach of the week this week because I just thought with all the mayhem around this team, with the Deshaun Watson shadow being cast over this team, I just thought it was an amazing job by Houston to get ready for this game and to not allow all the outside forces to ruin their season.
I think another thing when you look at that win, all under the thought, Peter, of how did Houston not only win, but how do they win and make it look easy, winning by double digits? They have some real pros, some quality veterans at some really important spots. Tyrod Taylor has a nice resume in this league. I mean, he didn't have a lot of teams lining up to make him their franchise quarterback, and Houston certainly got there by default. But this is someone, if he's your backup quarterback, you feel great about it, and you have confidence that he's going to have a lot of good games if he is the starter. And then at receiver, there's Cooks. At running back, there's Ingram. So there's just, afterward, looking at it, there are more quality veterans, some real pros who've done well in this league on that side, as opposed to Jacksonville, where there's just a lot of excitement and potential. And I'm keeping it in the AFC, Peter. There's so many reasons to feel good about what Pittsburgh did in that win against Buffalo. When you look at phases of the game and individuals for the Steelers who stood up and raised their hand and said, I'm going to make a difference in this huge win, who comes to mind?
The thing that really stuck out to me, and I ended up speaking to him for a few minutes after the game, what stuck out to me was Deontay Johnson. Now, remember, Deontay Johnson last year, when the Pittsburgh Steelers went to Buffalo, dropped 2 passes in the first quarter. He had 14 drops for the season, led everybody in the NFL, and he got benched for the rest of the first half. Mike Tomlin was just sick of his drops, and he worked on that a lot in the offseason. He got one of the assistant equipment managers to go out before and after every practice and during training camp, and now he's continuing into the season, working on different drills, not only with the jugs machine, but in catching tennis balls one-handed. And if you see this, if you see his touchdown in this game, he's closely covered in the left corner of the end zone. And the Steelers need this play. They need this score to make their offense come alive. Levi Wallace tips the ball, and at that moment, instead of just sort of giving up on the ball, you could see that Deontay Johnson extended both arms and somehow, some way, came up with the ball and dragged one foot to make sure that he stayed in bounds. To me, it was one of the great plays of week 1 of this season, and it was made by a guy who spent all of last year in the doghouse because of all his drops.
And going a little more macro on that win, Peter, and I know I spent a lot of time around college football, and I don't want to make this too collegiate, but that was a meaningful type of win for the Steelers, not just getting off to 1-0 start, but many people, the big bad Steelers, picking Pittsburgh to finish bottom half of the AFC North. You go to the team that's a very popular pick for very good reason to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, and you come from behind and do that with that kind of second half. I mean, that's not your ordinary win. I know these are grown-ups. These are professionals who are paid to win every Sunday, but I have to think that they walk back into that facility this week with a different kind of feel, different kind of confidence than a lot of the other teams who are also 1-0.
Agreed, totally. And it was really an interesting week for the AFC North. The Bengals with an unlikely win over the Vikings. And, you know, what really stuck out to me is, look, Cleveland is a very good team. Cleveland is a top 10 team in the NFL right now. But in the last 12 minutes of their game against the Kansas City Chiefs, they went from maybe not controlling the game total, but you know, being in the lead and having a good chance to win. And then 2 plays happen. The punter drops an incredibly easy snap to him, a perfect snap. He drops it, ends up getting snowed under. Kevin Stefanski, the coach, said, hey, he should have still tried to punt the ball when he picked it up. And on replay, I went back and looked at it, and I said, yeah, he probably should have. That happens, and then an unfortunate interception for Baker Mayfield. It wasn't entirely his fault, but he threw it. He's got to take responsibility for it. So those 2 plays, Cleveland at the end of this game was not ready for prime time, but I still like the Browns out of this game.
Hey, Peter, in the first half, my Super Bowl pick looked pretty good. I was feeling like I think the Steelers feel this week walking into their facility. I'm like, I can do this. I can make a good Super Bowl prediction. Then the second half happened with those mistakes. Here's what stands out to me about Cleveland, Baker Mayfield right now. A little while ago, I talked about Lamar Jackson and how he's being held to a very high standard that he created for himself with his own individual success and the team success, that he's only going to have a good season if you can picture him and if he does succeed in January and even February. It's been a much more accelerated track for Baker Mayfield in Cleveland these last few months. But if they can't win at Kansas City, then this season is going to be kind of a failure for them based off the expectations. So they were wonderful for most of the game, first half especially. But when it came down to their ultimate litmus test, can you win in Arrowhead? Can Baker Mayfield get the best of Patrick Mahomes? The answer, it's harsh, but the answer is no. And that's why that team, still has a ways to go, because they're trying to beat the very best team in the AFC.
Paul, appreciate your help this week breaking down week 1. We will be back to do it again next week with week 2.